welcome to DNET, the Disability Network. I'm Joanne Smith, and with me is Ken Cavanaugh. Today we have a full agenda for our program.
Federal, provincial, and territorial ministers are all making statements of support of people with disabilities, but so far statements only.
Even more children with disabilities could be affected by the Supreme Court ruling on the integration of mainstream classrooms.
The passing in Toronto of Rona Mickelson, a pioneer in the arts and entertainment field.
And we're following up with more discussion on the Federal Task Force report on disability issues, this week from the East Coast. But first, here's Ken with this week's update of disability stories.
Last year, Marilyn Mashinsky, Ontario's Minister of Citizenship, repealed the province's Employment Equity Act, much to the alarm of a number of organizations fighting for rights of individual equality. Well, now the official reaction and protest is underway. Here's reporter Matt Maychuk.
Marilyn Farrell has cerebral palsy, but what she suffers from is chronic unemployment.
I'm lucky if I can even get an employer to talk to me on the phone.
So the writer and researcher with a degree in social work was upset when the Harris Conservatives scrapped a new law that would require employers to come up with plans and timetables for hiring more disabled people.
I was pretty depressed last winter. I felt, well, what am I going to do now?
What Farrell is going to do now is fight back. She and others are going to court to argue the repeal of the law violates the equality rights guaranteed by the Constitution.
The Employment Equity Act gave me hope.
There's nothing in this legislation because it is all based on quotas and
the group says Mike Harris was wrong during the election campaign when he claimed the law amounted to reverse discrimination. The Tories say they do want to promote the hiring of minorities, but not through heavy-handed legislation.
We believe in merit, not quotas.
But Farrell says even if the court fight drags on, it will be worth it.
It's given me a voice.
It could take 3 to 5 years for this court challenge to make its way to the Supreme Court of Canada. But activists like Marilyn Farrell say in the meantime, they get to state their case. And for now, that's what counts. Matt Maychak, CBC News, Queen's Park.
An advocacy organization is recommending that a mechanism be set up to deal with complaints about abuse in institutions. ARCH, a legal resource center for people with disabilities, has heard of 20 cases in the last year and a half. The center also recommends that a system be set up to gain a true measure of the incidence of abuse in Ontario. Disability issues were among the topics of discussion for federal, provincial, and territorial ministers late last month. Federal Human Resources Minister Pierre Pettigrew was among those who attended the meeting in Toronto. Last week in the House of Commons, Pettigrew marked the International Day of the Disabled, in part by giving the federal government's view of the high-level session.
My federal, provincial, and territorial colleagues are committed to working together to harmonize our approaches to better serve the needs of Canadians with disabilities. Federal, provincial, and territorial working groups are looking at various options that we can bring back to First Ministers in the coming months.
Pettigrew's statements were not to go unchallenged by other parties.
We are waiting for the minister to table specific measures, not in the Red Book, not in the second version of the Red Book, not during the upcoming campaign. We want something done immediately.
Now, the needs of disabled persons, I believe, are far more likely to be met by provinces or levels closer to those individuals that can tailor those services more specifically to the needs of those citizens.
In October, the Supreme Court of Canada reversed a lower court ruling that supported the integration of young children with disabilities into mainstream classrooms. The action was brought by the Brant Board of Education in Ontario. What are the implications for students already accepted and functioning in classrooms? Well, here's the case of a young student in his integrated classroom in Montreal and how his future might be jeopardized.
Okay, let's see that energy flow.
Raymond Simonara is 9 years old. He was born with Down syndrome, a genetic disorder that can affect learning and development. Historically, many kids with Downs were placed in segregated schools for kids with intellectual challenges. But Rayman isn't in a special school. He's at Dalkeith Elementary in Montreal, integrated into a mainstream grade 4 class. Raymond is part of a growing group of children whose parents think they're better off with regular kids.
When Rayman was born, like any parent, I wanted to celebrate my child. And as any parent, my preoccupation was that of wanting him to be happy in his life. And I knew instinctively that he could not have that if he was living in a segregated world.
Bob Plunkett is key to helping Rayman fit in. Plunkett is a child care worker. He spends half his day at Rayman's side, facilitating his learning and helping him focus his attention.
Well, with my experience, I think for Ray, he's learning how to be a normal child, rather than a child who has Down syndrome.
That, in a large part, is why many parents and educators believe in integration. Rayman is surrounded by kids without disabilities, and the hope is he'll learn by example.
Rayman has very good social skills, and a natural, a more normal environment like an integrated school provides him those models to develop the social skills.
But now parents are worried they may lose the right to integrate their disabled kids. This is Emily Eaton. Last year, an Ontario Court of Appeals ruled that a school board did not have the constitutional right to force Emily into a special class. But in October, the Supreme Court reversed that decision, implying that integration is not a right under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
They are telling all parents with handicapped children that they don't have the right to decide what is best for their children when it comes to their education. So yes, I'm indignant, and I think that it's justifiably so.
The Supreme Court of Canada hasn't yet given its reasons for its decision on school integration. Until it does, it's difficult to say where and with whom Raymond C. Manera and other kids with special needs will go to school. Whereas some school systems might be inclined to cut services for the students with disabilities in order to cut costs, some Quebec schools have placed those students on a higher priority. They've chosen to cut other activities in order to keep their integrated programs intact. A pioneer in the arts and entertainment field for people with disabilities, Rona Mickelson, has died in Toronto. She founded Star Trek's talent agency in 1988, helping people in the fields of film, TV, and print. Although only 42, Ms. Mickelson was the recipient of many awards over her career. The King Clancy Award for exceptional contributions to the disability community, for instance, and the Toronto Award of Merit. Mrs. Mickelson is survived by her father, who has announced he'll continue to operate the agency, supporting the development of talent with disabilities.
That's our roundup. Coming up, we move to New Brunswick with a further look at the Federal Task Force on Disability Issues.
And later, we'll open the covers on a book published about the Atlanta experience. This is the Disability Network.
This program is brought to you in part by the Royal Bank of Canada, serving Canadians for 126 years, one customer at a time.
To date, there haven't been any major announcements or actions taken on the recommendations of the federal government's Task Force on Disability Issues. People who attended the hearings during the summer are still watching for follow-ups on the report, which was entitled, you'll remember, The Will to Act.
This week, we go to New Brunswick. Families that have members with disabilities are concerned about the direction of social policy and employment prospects for their children. Bill McQueen reports on how some of the committee's recommendations touch on those issues.
Today we visit Fredericton, New Brunswick, one of the 14 cross-country stops.
Since 1981, the International Year of Disabled Persons, there has been virtually thousands of gatherings across the country. These meetings are necessary in order to keep the challenges Canadians with disabilities face in the minds and on the agendas of those people who have the capacity to affect change.
Lorraine Silliphant attended the Fredericton consultation back in August.
The federal government could develop and implement a national policy framework based on the vision of people with a disability as contributing, participating members of society, the labor force, and the economy. a vision of people being supported to determine their own futures and to be members of their communities, as opposed to being clients of programs. And if you don't mind, before you put some of those, you could just set the table.
She wants to help improve the lives of people with disabilities and their families, and she's been active in the New Brunswick communities for more than 20 years.
I think there's a big strain on families these days when one person has an individual with a disability, and that strain is maybe not, I mean, some of it's day to day, but a lot of it is the long term, what's going to happen when mom and dad aren't there to look after the person in the family.
Ralph Silliphant still lives at home, but his family has supported him in his search for work and independence.
I work with the Association for Community Living. We had a meeting yesterday where families of a person who's 3-year-old and families of someone who's 37 are saying, we're really scared. We don't know what's coming down the pike for our son and daughter.
In the shift of powers and dollars from the federal to provincial and local governments, there is fear that there may be increased financial pressure on families with members with disabilities and a return to the days when families suffered a lot.
I think the report hits on a number of things. One is about citizenship, and people can't practice citizenship unless they have some of the wherewithal to do that. And I think if the federal government would look at an income for people, including support for people to get and keep jobs so they have their own income. Ralph has just finished working at the Bucket Club, and he just loved it there. He just got a check. That's very esteemed building when you get money for your work. What will happen is he probably won't get work in the near future, but he will next spring.
When we visited the Silliphants in November, Lorraine was on her way to a local People's Forum meeting.
I'm genuinely here to listen and look forward to the afternoon.
In these times, it isn't only the economic situation, but politically. How do you have a national vision for what citizenship means for every person, whether they have a disability or not? And if you hook that to policy and principles and objectives, how do you get that implemented across this country?
Within the 52 recommendations of the task force report, there's a call in Recommendation 27 for a commitment to serving people with disabilities in proportion to their representation in the working age population. And Recommendation 8 calls for the introduction of a Canadians with Disabilities Act. It could ensure consistent action, coordination, and accountability at the federal level.
And I think the Canadians with Disabilities Act as a commitment to proactive activity by the federal government is important. I would say the employment measures on the labor integration side, the market integration side, I think those are very important because Canadians with disabilities really have the same call on the government to assist them in terms of accessing jobs as everyone else.
One of the messages that came across very loud and very strong at the forum here was, would you listen to us? And then having listened to us and having listened to us before and having had reports on everything for 20 years, would you please implement it?
We will keep you posted on developments with regard to any action on the task force recommendations. In the meantime, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the report. Write to us. We'll give you our address at the end of the program.
When we come back, what goes on behind the scenes at a book publisher's when an international project is almost ready for the printing press and the bookstores?
We did go out and get your typical sports shots, but the ones that will be selected for the book will be more than that.
Last summer's Paralympic Games were one of the biggest sporting events of the year. While they didn't get too much exposure in North America, that's not the case worldwide. Countless TV crews, newspapers, and magazine reporters descended on Atlanta to chronicle stories produced at the Games. There was, however, only one group intent on producing a book, and Canadian publisher Jeff Thiessen led that effort. What he and his crew brought back and are now assembling is a collection of images and impressions that he hopes will reflect the true spirit of the Games.
I declare the 1996 Paralympic Games of Atlanta open.
The Paralympic Games in Atlanta provided spectacle, spirit, and an opportunity to compete with the best in the world.
Pretty tight on this final lap.
Morning.
Jeff Thiessen is used to competition. As director of Disability Today Publishing, he competed to win the rights to publish a book about the Games. He's also competed in the Paralympics himself.
Definitely my past Paralympic experience enabled us to first get the contract to do the book that we're doing, and I think do the kind of job that we expect of ourselves because of my experience as a Paralympic athlete. I was competed in 1984. In '88, set a world record in the 400-meter event for my class, which is double arm amputee, and brought a gold medal home with that race. And in '92, ended up in third place, a bronze.
After leaving competition behind, Jeff still felt he needed a bridge between his life on the track and his life as a publisher.
Immediately after the Games in '92, I knew that was it for me. I was retiring and moving on to spend more time with Disability Today Publishing, and I thought that being involved in some capacity, professionally, as it turned out, in terms of producing a book, it would kind of fill a void for me.
After looking through 8,000 photos, Jeff is getting a sense of how the book will take shape.
Ultimately, it will be a photo essay, a chronicling of 10 days of activity in Atlanta. It will be photo-oriented. We're looking at about a 224-page book, and there will be approximately 250 photos. We'll leave these stories for a moment, and we'll go...
Jeff's now busy with his writers, selecting articles for the book.
Now that we're back here and the Games are over, the writers and I are working closely to determine what's going to go in the book. We brought back much more than we need. We need to now whittle it down to fit amongst the photos, to complement the photography. We got to look at these stories, right? I like to, as editor and publisher, I like to work closely with the writers in that capacity.
He says that selecting photos is a difficult process.
The editorial and the photography have to walk hand in hand. They need to support each other. The photography needs to reflect the premise of the book, triumph of the human spirit. So we did go out and get your typical sport shots, but the ones that will be selected for the book will be more than that. This photo, it's a bit different than the rest. She's given all that she's got. She's taken off her glasses, so it suggests she's a visually impaired athlete. Together with the exhilaration in the photo really makes this one a keeper for the book. Never has there been coverage like that before, or let alone the paper.
Jeff and his crew uncovered many stories in Atlanta. One of them, the story of a Bosnian athlete, left a lasting impression on Jeff.
He told us his story of how he trains in Bosnia now, and he does that as early in the morning as possible because there isn't much shelling and gunfire at that time of day. His story involved him amputating his own leg. He was shot 6 times or something in battle. We talked to him after one of his events, and his leg was bleeding, and we asked him how possibly can you compete on a leg that looks, a stump that looks that sore? And he said, believe me, my leg has been much more sore back home than it is here, where I have a chance to compete. And I think his kind of closing line to us was, buildings can be torn down or broken, but man's spirit can't be.
It's important to Jeff that the book attracts a general readership and that the book meets the standards of others found in the sports sections of bookstores across North America.
We want it to stand out as a source of inspiration or motivation, a showcase of talent and athleticism. And if someone recognizes that in it and overlooks the fact that these athletes happen to have disabilities, I think we've done our job.
Watch for the release of the book, Triumph of the Human Spirit, in January.
Speaking of January, in a few weeks on DNet, we'll be rebroadcasting 2 one-hour specials that highlight the successful performance by the Canadian team in Atlanta. That'll be on the last Saturday in December, the first one in January 1997. Check your local listings.
When we come back, a cafe with a difference, Alternative Grounds. holiday season is upon us now, and it's the time of year when we start thinking about gift giving and decorating our home. Our next story from Toronto is about a cafe with a difference. It's a cafe where people with disabilities are encouraged to develop and share their talents all year round. The Alternative Grounds Cafe in Toronto is a venture that focuses on providing opportunities. Like other cafes, it's a place where people can meet and share experiences. But here, people can also exchange and develop their talents.
What do you think? Should we get that in private?
This year's second annual craft show was held recently. The event was organized by Linda Burnside. She's the cafe's owner, and she's also a longtime personal advocate.
It was around recognizing the gift in people and how that seems to be so much more difficult if you happen to have a disability. People can't get over that, right? The fact that you paint or that you make music or whatever, people need to know one another as people, right? And one of the ways of doing that is that if there's a mediation, whether it's food or whether it's a craft or whatever, so that people actually connect.
The diversity brewing at the Alternative Grounds Cafe also means a lot to Deirdre Staten. She's an entrepreneur who designs and makes her own jewelry. The cafe provides her with an opportunity to support herself.
Now you are a proud of yourself. You would know how it would feel if you didn't run yourself in this.
It strengthens the community and in some ways really empowers people because they make connections here.
That's our program. Remember, we'd like to hear from you. If you have any thoughts about our programming or any story ideas, write to us. Our address is coming right up. I'm Joanne Smith.
And I'm Ken Kavanagh. See you again next week. Our address is Disability Network, CBC Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6.
Or you can fax us at 416-205-3399.
This program is brought to you in part by the Royal Bank of Canada, serving Canadians for 126 years, one customer at a time.